Okay. There's a question that I can answer online, so I will do that at through the question and answer. I'm so sorry. Close that. Now we're going to get into the guts of the application. So now we're going to start with the first program schedule that we're going to go over, and that is the PS 3109, which is your Rural Education Achievement Program, or REAP, and funding transferability schedule. There is a very valuable resource within the program guidelines of the application, and it actually shows you a side-by-side comparison between funding transferability and Title V Part B Subpart 1 REAP Flex, or as the U.S. Department calls it, Alternative Funds Use Authority, or AFWA. Within that guidance, it will give you a side-by-side of exactly what can be done with REAP and what can be done if you utilize funding transferability. But just in summary, in order to exercise REAP Flex, a district must be eligible for Small Rural Schools Achievement Program, or SRSA. Those districts have already been notified that are eligible to have applied for SRSA, and that is the report that we put out on grant opportunities that actually has the list of LEAs that are eligible to exercise this authority. And then funding transferability, all LEAs are actually eligible to exercise funding transferability. The major difference between the two is for REAP Flex, those districts that are eligible do not have to are not subject to the rules and requirements of the programs that they actually REAP to where for funding transferability, those funds become the funds of the program where they are transferred and are now subject to the rules and requirements of those programs. And you also, for REAP, you do not have to have applied for that program in order to exercise that flexibility. Example, if you want to do REAP from Title II into Title I, but you didn't apply for Title I, you can still exercise that authority. To where funding transferability, you actually have to apply for that program in order to transfer, in order to exercise funding transferability. And I'll kind of explain that in a bit as I go through the schedule itself. Within that resource, it outlines questions and what you can and cannot do between the two different authorities. Which LEAs can exercise the authority, which funds are eligible for the flexibility, that's only Title II and Title IV. How many LEAs exercising this flexibility how may LEAs exercising this flexibility spend the eligible funds? What rules apply to the funds? Does an LEA need to receive funds under a given program in order to spend eligible funds under the program? What are LEA's responsibilities for providing equitable services under this authority? And then what steps does an eligible LEA need to take to exercise this flexibility? So I highly encourage you to go to the program guidelines and go to the Title V Part A section of the guidelines to see that side by side to determine if you would to determine the differences between the two. Okay, now this is what the PS 3109 schedule looks like. As you can see, there's two sections. There's a Part A and a Part B. Part A will tell you is the REAP, and Part B is the funding transferability. We're going to go through the REAP section first. REAP is Part A, and LEAs need to be eligible for REAP to utilize this flexibility. Funds do not transfer, but may be used for local activities authorized under ESSA. Funds are not subject to all the rules and requirements. LEAs do not have to receive funds under a program to spend Title II or Title IV funds on an allowable local activity. LEAs must provide equitable services relative to Title II or Title IV. LEAs must also reserve for the benefit of PMP and teachers. LEA may exercise reflex with PMP reserve funds. And then funds for PMP need not be expended under same programs as public schools and should serve to meet the needs of PMP. And the eligible programs are Title II and Title IV, and the receiving programs are Title I, Part A, Title II, Part A, Title III, Part A, ELA and Immigrant, Title IV, Part A, and Title IV, Part B, which is 21st century. Okay, how do we complete this section? If an LEA does not apply for Title II or Title IV, the system will automatically gray out the row for the respective program. If the LEA does apply for Title II and Title IV and is not eligible to exercise reflex, or is eligible to exercise reflex but elects not to participate, then the LEA will select does not apply checkbox for each applicable fund source. So once you look at the list that's available on grant opportunities, if you're not eligible, if you're eligible to, or if you applied for Title II or Title IV, but are not eligible to do reflex, then you would just check that box. If you're not certain, you can contact your regional negotiator and they can help you through that process to determine your eligibility. If an LEA does apply for Title II or Title IV and is eligible to exercise reflex and the LEA elects to participate, the LEA will enter the percentage from the respective program to the receiving program. For each program the LEA exercises reflex, the total cannot exceed 100%. So for this example, the LEA elected is REAP eligible. They elected to apply for Title II Part A. They're going to REAP 90% of their Title II Part A into Title I. Then they are also going to do the remaining 10%. They're going to put into Title III Part A. So that's already 100%. So they cannot exceed 100% of Title II if they were to elect, in this example, if they were to elect to do funding transferability as well. They've already exhausted 100% of Title II Part A by reaping into Title I and Title III. As you can see, the LEA did not receive funds under Title III, where you can see that under funding transferability. But yet, because of the flexibility allowed under REAP, you can still REAP money into Title III and have a Title III program, even though you did not apply for Title III. If the LEA exercises to do both reflex and funding transferability for each program, the total cannot exceed 100%, which I kind of went over that a little bit a minute ago about you've exhausted already all your Title II Part A funds by doing 90 and 10%. Okay, if you are a fiscal agent or if you are a member of a shared services arrangement, what does that look like for both the fiscal agent and the member? The member section is enabled only for the grantees that apply as a fiscal agent on the ADC. That means that if I am a fiscal agent for Title II Part A, but not for Title IV, when the fiscal agent opens up the PS 3109, they're going to see all of their members listed on the PS 3109, and they will be listed individually. The only program they can complete under Part A is only for that applicable fund source, which is Title II. Title IV will not be available to them to complete since they are not the fiscal agent for Title IV. In the reverse, if you are a member of a shared services arrangement, you will, when you open up the PS 3109, you will not have access to Title II Part A because that is now with your fiscal agent, but you will have Title IV available to you to complete. If the grantee is not the fiscal agent for Title II or Title IV, the system will automatically gray out the row for the respective program. Okay, now we're going to go over PS 3109, which is funding transferability. All LEAs are eligible to complete the funding transferability section and exercise funding transferability. When an LEA exercises funding transferability, those funds become funds of the program to which they are transferred and are subject to the rules and requirements. That's a very big difference from REAP. LEAs may only transfer eligible funds into a program the LEA has applied for on the ADC. Funds remain in their original fund source and are reported as expenditures under the original fund source. It is the use of funds that is redirected. So when you go into your application, you will see that even though you're going to be, if you elect to exercise funding transferability, you'll see the impact on some of your program schedules as far as availability of funds, but you will not see that transfer actually on your budget schedule. The funds stay with the original fund source. All your expenditure reporting will be also with the original fund source. You do not report those transfer funds within the program that they were transferred to. There's no physical transfer of the money. It's just the use is redirected. LEAs must provide equitable services based on the funds remaining after the transfer. Cannot reserve Title IIA or Title IVA funds solely to provide equitable services. Before transferring funds, an LEA must conduct timely and meaningful consultation with the PMP, modify campus or district improvement plans to reflect the transfer, and notify TEA of the transfer 30 days before the transfer's effective date. In other words, you cannot do funding transferability and then ask for permission or approval of your application after the fact. You have to do that 30 days before. You can use Title II and Title IV to transfer into Title I Part A, Title I Part C, Title I Part D, Title II Part A, Title III Part A, ELA and Immigrant, Title IV Part A, Title V Part B, Rural and Low-Income Schools, and in order to transfer money out of Title into Title IV Part B, the district must be eligible to apply for rural and low income, and that will be verified when the rural and low income list becomes available. Okay, how to complete Section B, which is your funding transferability. If the LEA does not apply for Title II or Title IV, the system will automatically gray out the respective program. If the LEA does apply for Title II or Title IV and elects not to participate in funding transferability, then LEA selects the does not apply checkbox for each applicable fund source. So in this example, kind of using, this is a district who is going to use both REAP and funding transferability. So they did 100% of Title II using REAP. So now they are not eligible to do anything with Title II Part A. But here they are, so they still have Title IV, I'm sorry. So then, if the district does apply for Title II or Title IV and elects to participate in funding transferability, the LEA enters the percentage from the respective program to the receiving program. For each LEA, for each program the LEA exercises funding transferability, the total cannot exceed 100%. Then if the LEA exercises both reflex and funding transferability, the total cannot exceed 100%. So in this example, they did 100% of Title IV into Title I Part A. So for the funding transferability member section, it works just like REAP, to where the funding section will be, the member section is enabled only for the grantees that apply as a fiscal agent on the ADC. All members of the SSA will be listed individually. So for this, if I am a fiscal agent for Title IV, but not for Title II, then I am only going to see the Title IV, all my districts within my shared service arrangement, but only Title IV will be enabled, not Title II. If the fiscal agent will complete Part B, funding transferability for each member of the SSA for the applicable fund source, if the grantee is not the fiscal agent for Title II or Title IV, the system will automatically gray out the row. Also, I've said that there is an impact of doing funding transferability to program schedules. So exercising funding transferability impacts the available funds to the program, to the funds they are transferred to. The funds available section is the current year allocation. This does not include reallocation or carryover amounts, and then reservations and programmatic requirements are impacted by the total allocation and transfer amount. This is a dependency that we spoke about. This is an example of the PS 3101, which is your Title I Part A schedule. If a district reaps or does funding transferability into Title I, you will see what that REAP amount from Title II or Title IV will look like. The funds available is the impact of your funding transferability funds. So you will see what that current allocation of funds are. And that is going to be what shows on your budget schedule on the BS 6001. But this is only your current year allocation. This does not include any any reallocation amounts or carryover amounts from the prior year. This is just strictly current year allocation. So once you may have a planning amount here, once final amounts come out, this amount will change on your current year allocation funds. Again, these two, one, you're going to have a transfer in from Title II Part A or transfer in from Title IV Part A. Those are calculated amounts on the amount from the Title II or Title IV program, what those allocations are from those two programs based on the percentage you put on the PS 3109. Then it'll give you a total allocation and transfer amount. So that's inclusive of your current year allocation plus your transfer amounts. This is the amount under total allocation and transfer amount that you will need to use for your reservations and your programmatic requirements. For 24-25, there is going to be a new section on the PS 3109 called prior year data. When you open up your PS 3109, that section, you'll see that section, but it'll be disabled. It is a newly added section. This allows LEA's ability to let TEA know the intent of carryover funds. So this section is not available to LEAs until carryover has populated on your budget schedule. Once carryover funds are available on the BS 6001 and LEA has carryover funds in Title II Part A or Title IV Part A, the prior year section will populate with the PS 3109 data from the prior year's application. So it's going to bring in your data from 23-24 if you have Title II or Title IV carryover on your budget schedule. So how to complete this section? The carryover amounts on your BS 6001 Part 1, Line 4, which is your carryover amount, has been populated. Your prior year PS 3109 data is populated under for the applicable fund source that have a carryover amount greater than 0. For Title II Part A, the options on this example are you can leave it as it is, which here we had 50%. So we can leave it as it is, and that amount transferred into Title I, or you can increase that amount transferred into Title I. But you can only increase into Title I, you cannot decrease that amount. So we cannot change that 50% to, let's say, 10%. You can go up, but you can't go down. For Title IV, the option in this example is that none, since there is no carryover in the system. So if you see here, it's got a 0 carryover amount for Title IV. So you're not able to do anything with the Title IV line. Now in the member section, it will be the same rules for prior year as the fiscal agent or the grantee. The member section is enabled only for the grantees that applies a fiscal agent on the ADC. All members of the SSA will be listed individually. The fiscal agent will complete Part B funding transferability for each member of the SSA. And then if the grantee is not, then the fiscal agent for Title II Part A or Title IV Part A, the system will automatically grant the program. So this works just like it does for the other member section on the regular, for the current year. Okay, well, that's all I have for PS 3109. And now Lenitra will talk about private nonprofit.
Good morning. I will be discussing the PS 3099, which is the private nonprofit school equitable services schedule. All LEAs will need to complete the first two questions under Part 1A. Prior to working on the PS 3099, it's highly recommended that LEAs complete the PS 3109, which is the REAP and funding transferability schedule that Dee Dee Garcia just spoke about, prior to completing the private school schedule. As a reminder, charter schools are not eligible to provide equitable services, and therefore equitable services do not apply to charter schools. So a charter school would not get this schedule to complete as part of their consolidated application. Part 1A, the first question is, are any private nonprofit schools located within the LEA's boundaries? Even if you're not providing equitable services for the year, all districts are required to answer that question and also answer the second question, which states, does the LEA have any Title I Part A eligible students that are attending private nonprofit schools outside of the boundaries? If the question is yes to any of those questions, then it's going to ask, then you move on to Part 1B. Are any private schools participating? With Part B, the LEA must make a response for each program where they, first of all, have received a grant and also that they have participating private schools. So for example, if you're an LEA that does not receive a grant for Title III, Part A, you would not have, that section will be grayed out, and you would not provide equitable services to a private school that has a need for Title III services. Because if the local LEA does not receive that grant, there is no responsibility for them to provide equitable services to a private school without having funding for that particular grant. Part 1C are the assurances. Every LEA, if you're moving forward with this application, must submit this. If the LEA has met these requirements, first, that you have discussed all consultation requirements, and those are listed on the affirmation of consultation form, and also that you assure that those affirmations of consultation forms are provided to TEA. And so if those two things are true and the LEA has documentation to support it, and you should if you're providing equitable services, then the LEA would check both boxes, 1 and 2. The last thing that I want to remind you on this slide is that we will be starting a new process for the 24-25 affirmation of consultation forms. This next year, affirmation consultation forms will be submitted through a new PNP affirmation work app. There will be more details on that later in the summer. There will be a training specifically for the PNP affirmation work app to show districts how to work through the work app, how to submit data, and how to upload their signed affirmations. Again, with this system, you would do as you did in the past. Only those private schools that are participating would the LEA submit those affirmations through the work app. For the 23-24 school year, this current year, you will still enter your revisions of affirmation through the ESSA reports. The next section is Title I, Part A. For Title I, Part A, the district will enter the low-income enrollment from the district that are participating with Title I attendance centers, and that will be for ages 5 through 17. The district will also collect those numbers for any low-income students that are attending private nonprofit schools that are eligible. And the district must select one of the 4 options for poverty to collect that low-income measure. Due to the way that our application is set up, the LEA must only use one poverty method for all of their private schools. So for example, if the district has decided that they are going to apply the low income percentage of each participating public school to determine the number of private school students who reside in that attendance center, then that would be true for all private schools that are participating with Title I, Part A. If selected, then on the Part 2A, line 10, the administration of Title I, Part A programs for the eligible private nonprofit students, you would enter what that amount is. The amount in Part 2, number 10, must match the administrative amounts that are also in Title I, Part A in their PS 3101, Part 1C, line 5. And you'll hear more about that administration amount where you put that on during the Title I, Part A session. There is a new verification that actually is behind the scenes for LEAs. And so this is just to let you know that if you're applying for Title I, Part A amounts in Titles 2A and Title 4A, those enrollment amounts must equal the same with with the Title II Part A and Title IV Part A. They must equal Part A3, which is the Title I Part A LEA total enrollment from the SC 5000. I think I went too far. Okay. And then we move to Title I Part C migrant. For the migrant student enrollment, the LEA identifies the migrant student enrollment ages 3 through 21. And so those ages would be put in for all of the eligible and identified migrant students for both public and nonprofit. And that would generate the amount in line 9, which is the calculated private school reservation. As a reminder for the migrant program, the participating private school must be located within the private school, within the LEA's district boundaries to receive any migrant services. For Title II Part A, this is the program that most private schools use for their professional development and training opportunities for their staff. So for the district, you would enter the total student enrollment amount, ages 5 through 17, as well as the student enrollment of all those private schools that are participating with Title II Part A, and those private schools that are located within the district. Once you enter those 2 amounts, then the system would auto-calculate after you insert any LEA reservations for direct administration. This is which is on line 8. That is a district decision if they are setting aside an amount for Title II Part A direct administration. In the background, the new verification is that if an LEA is applying for both Title II Part A and Title IV Part A, and not the Title I Part A, those amounts must equal. And again, it's showing another verification that if you are applying for Title I Part A, those amounts in Title II Part A and Title IV must equal Part A3, which is the local, the LEA total enrollment from the SC 5000. Title III Part A, which is the English language acquisition, the LEA enters the total identified English learners within the district for public and private ages 3 through 21. And so they would add those there, reserve any amount that it is using for direct administration in line 8, and then the system will automatically calculate the total private school reservation for the district. Again, in order for a private school to receive Title III services, it must have a private school that's located within the district boundaries and has identified students. There is a reservation maximum of 2% for the Title III direct administration. For the immigrant program, Title III Part A, the LEA will enter the total identified immigrant student enrollment. Again, that's going to be ages 3 through 21 for both the LEA and the private school. The private school, again, must be located within district boundaries. In line 8, if there is any reservation for the immigrant direct administration, the LEA would complete line 8, and then the system would calculate the amount of private school dollars for equitable services in line 11. Title IV Part A is one of the programs that is used for school safety, safe and healthy students, for well-rounded education, and or the effective use of technology. And so for the F1, you're going to enter the total student enrollment in the district, and then the total student enrollment number 2 for participating private schools. You will only be using those enrollments that are for students ages 5 through 17 and located from private schools located within the district. The verification that is behind the scenes is if an LEA is applying for both Title II and Title IV Part A and not Title I Part A. Part C1, which is Title IIA, and Part F1, which is the Title IV program, those amounts must be the same as the LEA total enrollment. Another new verification that is behind the scenes is if an LEA is applying for Title I Part A amounts in Title II Part A and the Title IV Part A, the total enrollment amounts, which is the F1 and C1, must equal Part A3, which is the LEA total enrollment from the SC 5000. And now I will turn it over to Vivian.
Good morning. I'm Vivian Smurl, and I'm the Program Director for Title I Part A, and I'll be walking you through the two Title I Part A program schedules today. The first one that we're going to cover is the PS 3101. In part one, this is information that is transferred directly from the REAP schedules that Dee Dee went over. So if the LEA is transferring in from Title II Part A or Title IV Part A, those amounts will automatically populate in Part A. In Part 1B, line 1 of Part B will is where you would have your current year allocation for Title I Part A, as well as any amounts that you have transferred in from Title II Part A or Title IV Part A, and those will add up to the total Title I Part A allocation. This is the amount that the rest of the schedule will be using to calculate the percentages from the dollar amounts that the LEA places in Part 1C. So that's what we're going to go over next, is the Part 1C. This is where the LEA is telling the information about what amounts are being reserved at the district level for authorized and required activities. So the first four lines of this particular part are the areas that are required reservations if they apply to the LEA. So we'll go over each one of these lines. The first line is the district-wide parent and family engagement activities. LEAs that have a Title I Part A entitlement that exceeds $500,000 are required to reserve at least 1% of that amount for PFE, parent and family engagement activities. Since this is a requirement for those LEAs with entitlements that exceed $500,000, for those LEAs, the NA feature will be disabled and the LEA will be required to enter an amount. For those LEAs that, LEAs may also reserve more than the 1% requirement if they so choose. LEAs that have smaller entitlements would also use this line, but they may choose to reserve funds at the LEA level for parent and family engagement activities, but they are not required to reserve a particular percentage. If the LEA with smaller entitlement amounts chooses not to reserve funds for PFE activities, they would be able to check the not applicable box. The second line is for services to homeless students. All LEAs must reserve some Title I Part A funds to serve homeless students. So the not applicable box is grayed out. So that's not an option for this particular line. The LEA must document that the amount of the reservation for homeless students is based on need. We have developed a worksheet for LEAs to use when they are determining what their homeless reservation amounts should be. There is a link provided on this slide. LEAs are required to make at least a $100 reservation, but they want the reservation amount to be based on need. The $100 is just to help trigger the application process. The LEA, whether they use the worksheet we have provided or some other form of needs assessment, the LEA should retain that on file locally so that they are able to document that their homeless reservation was based on need. The third line of the required reservations are for services to students who are residing in local facilities for the neglected. LEAs that have a facility for the neglected children that is located within their boundaries receive part of their Title I Part A allocation based on the number of children that are reported as residing in that facility on the prior year's SC 9000. That's a survey that the districts complete every year in the fall. To keep that portion of its Title I Part A entitlement, the LEA must provide Title I Part A services to the students, either through a reservation on this page or through a campus allocation. And Gerardo will talk a little bit more about that when he discusses the 3102. But if the LEA is reserving funds for the neglected students at the local facility, this is the line where they would be recording that information. The fourth line is for Title I Part A services to eligible private school students. This would be the equitable services amount that was generated on the PS 3099 Part 2, line 11. The next lines that we'll be going over on the reservations are lines that are authorized by statute. They're not necessarily required, but they are allowable reservations that the LEA may choose to make. So line 5 is for direct administrative costs that the LEA incurs while providing equitable services to eligible private nonprofit students. This would be the same amount as was generated on the PS 3099 Part 2, line 10. Line 6 is for direct administrative cost for the Title I Part A program that the LEA operates. This would include the administration of Title I program for the Title I Part A program for students at facilities for the neglected or delinquent. Line 7 is for services to students who reside in local facilities for delinquent children. LEAs that have local facilities for delinquent children may reserve Title I Part A funds to provide services to those students. It is not required that they do. Those children also generate a Title I Part D, Subpart 2 allocation, which may or may not be sufficient for providing services to those students. The LEA can determine whether Title I Part A funds need to be used in addition to that. It is an allowable reservation of funds. Line 8 is for early childhood education programs. LEAs that reserve Title I Part A funds to support early childhood education services to low-income children that are below the age of compulsory school attendance must ensure that those services comply with the performance standards that have been established under Head Start. There is non-regulatory guidance from the U.S. Department of Education that is available to assist LEAs in determining what kind of services and how those services, what those service delivery models might look like. The link is provided in the slides for that non-regulatory guidance for early learning in under the Every Student Succeeds Act. Line 9 is for financial incentives and rewards that may be provided to teachers who serve students who are in Title I schools that have been identified for school improvement. The LEA may reserve not more than 5% of its Title I funds to provide such financial incentives and rewards to schools that are identified for comprehensive support and improvement activities or for targeted support and improvement activities under Section 1111D. The LEA may also use or reserve Title I Part A funds to provide school improvement activities under 1111D for campuses that have been identified for school improvement and support, for the comprehensive support and improvement, the targeted support and improvement, or the continued support for school and LEA improvement. It is not required that the LEA make this reservation, but if those schools need additional assistance to conduct school improvement activities, then the LEA may reserve part of its Title I Part A funds to assist with that. Line 11 is for coordinated services. This would be Title I Part A services that the LEA coordinates for its Title I Part A campuses. For example, if the LEA conducts a summer school for its Title I Part A campuses, that could be done as a coordinated service. Also, professional development for Title I Part A teachers, if that's being done at the district level, the LEA may put that type of service under the coordinated services line. Line 12 is for foster care transportation. LEAs that receive Title I Part A funds are required to collaborate with the state or local child welfare agencies to ensure that transportation for children in foster care is provided, arranged, and funded. There is non-regulatory guidance available for that to show what funding models are available under the non-regulatory guidance link here for ensuring educational stability for children in foster care. So to reserve the funds at the LEA level, the LEA would indicate in the first column there what dollar amount that they were going to be using for each of those lines. The percentage is going to auto-calculate. And for those lines that are not going to be used, the LEA would use the not applicable box that's in front of the description. After carryover amounts have been determined, usually in February, then the LEA would be able to enter the amount of any unexpended funds from the prior year reservation for those two required lines. The first one would be for the 1% reservation for parent and family engagement. If the LEA was required because of the amount of its entitlement to reserve at least 1%. If the LEA did not expend those funds, that 1% during the prior year, then when the carryover funds are made available, the LEA would be expected to budget the unexpended balance from the prior year's reservation. That would be a requirement for the district-wide PFE activities, as well as for the prior year's equitable services amounts. One of the changes from this schedule from last year is that the line for other with an explanation has been removed. We did that because the statute's very clear that the services that are the funds that may be reserved at the LEA level are to be for those activities that are required under statute or those activities that are authorized under statute. And so we have assigned those categories here. If the LEA has services that they reserved funds for using the other designation in prior years, the LEA would need to find a way to put it in one of these other categories. Frequently, if that has been like a contract with an outside entity to assist with the administration of the programs, then those reserve funds would be made under the administration line, likely on line 6. If the LEA has described other professional development or summer schools, that frequently has appeared in the other line in the past, the LEA would probably be able to put those activities under coordinated services. So it's not that they can't do those activities anymore, they just have to find a way of determining whether they meet one of the authorized or required lines as printed here. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the SC 5000, the Title I Part A campus selection schedule. We have an extensive training that we will be conducting on the SC 5000 on June 4th from 9 to noon. There will be a training in 2 parts. The first part will discuss campus eligibility and completing the SC 5000. And the second part will be discussing Title I Part A allocations. I'm going to go over the actual parts of the SE 5000 now, but I wanted you to understand that there's some significant pre-work that the LEA will need to do to gather the information that it needs to be able to complete the SE 5000. Part of it is understanding the campus eligibility rules so that you can be sure that you're making the correct selections as we go. So before you start the SE 5000 schedule, the district will want to create a spreadsheet that includes the following data for each campus. You'll need the total number of students who are enrolled or residing in the schools, the number of low-income students for each campus, and you need to calculate the low-income percentage for those campuses. The LEA would want to sort its campus list by the low-income percentage, so that would assist the LEA in determining its campus eligibility for Title I Part A. You'd be able to determine which schools were going to be eligible for school-wide programs, and you'd be able to select your campus status. There are video resources that are available to help you do that. And again, we will be conducting extensive training on the process of determining campus eligibility on the June 4th date. Okay, so let's take each part of the SE 5000. In Part A, the LEA campus name will pre-populate. The district would need to type in the LEA's overall low income percentage in line 2, so that my animation needs to catch up with me, sorry. So that this would be the overall LEA percentage. So it's the total number of low-income students in the LEA divided by the total enrollment in the LEA. And that's what the LEA would enter as its low-income percentage. The LEA total enrollment is going to auto-calculate as the LEA completes the rest of the SE 5000. So it's going to add up all of the enrollment numbers for each campus, and then it will auto-calculate that total for line 3 in Part A. So in Part B, the LEA's campus list, including the campus name, the campus number, and the grade span, is data that's pulled from Ask TED. So the LEA needs to be sure that its campus names, numbers, and grade span configurations is current in Ask TED, because that is the information that is going to be pulled over and populate the campus selection data section of the SC 5000. It's at this point that the LEA needs to make a decision whether it's going to use the copy prior year data button. This is a feature of the application that can be very helpful, or it can cause a great deal of angst. If the LEA starts to populate Section B or Part B, the campus data selection, or campus selection data, and then afterwards decides to use the copy prior year data, the information that has been put in is going to be overwritten. So if the LEA plans to use the copy prior year data, they need to click the button before they start entering additional data. The information that the copy of prior year data button will import is the basis of eligibility line column, the campus status column, and the information about consolidated funds. It will not pull over information about the total campus enrollment, because that's going to change every year. The LEA needs to enter that information fresh. Likewise, for the campus low income percentage, that information will not be copied over from the prior year, because the campus data changes from one year to the next. Campus eligibility for Title I Part A has to be determined every year. depending on how much in flux the LEA's enrollment numbers are, it's entirely possible that LEAs will change the order in terms of their rank status for eligibility. Some campuses may become eligible, some campuses may fall out of eligibility, but it all is based on the numbers that the LEA is required to enter every year. So let's look at one campus. Well, before we do that, there is a suggested order for completing Part B. It makes most sense for the schedule to start with the campus enrollment. The LEA can decide whether it wants to do this information campus by campus, or if they want to just put in the enrollments for all of the campuses down the line and then move on. That's the LEA's choice. Just depends on how it works best for you. But whether you're doing this on a district-wide basis, or if you're doing this on a campus per campus basis, this is the order that we suggest doing it in. So starting with the total campus enrollment, and then the campus low income percentages, and then select the basis of eligibility. If the LEA has additional Title I eligibility that it wants to consider, such as one-year transition, grade span grouping, or if it has an EdFlex individual programmatic waiver, or if it's not going to do any of those things, then they would complete that as the fourth item. By then, the LEA has enough information to be able to do its campus status, whether it's school-wide or targeted, skipped, or not served. If the LEA needs to indicate additional eligibility for school-wide programs, that would be next. If they're targeted assistance status, they would then enter the number of students served on the targeted assistance campuses. They would indicate, they would confirm the status of their consolidated funds, whether they were consolidating more than just Title I, whether they're doing all federal programs or whether they're doing federal, state, and local on the school-wide campus budgets. And then if there is any other information they need to put in the line for that particular campus. So that's the general selection, or the general suggested order for completing Section B. But let's, like if we were going to be completing it for this particular example, we would enter the campus enrollment for Sample Elementary. We would enter the low income percentage for Sample Elementary. We'd select the basis of eligibility. These are the options that are available under that drop down. Usually districts select enrollment, but they might choose residing, they might choose feeder pattern, optional method, or direct certification. The none is for those campuses that, like an alternative certification program where the campus is not, does not have its own enrollment. Those enrollments are kept for accountability purposes back at the home campus. So the LEA would be entering zeros for a campus. Their basis of eligibility would then be none. The district would also use none if it was a campus that was closed and the LEA needed to complete the line with zeros for a closed campus. So then for each campus to continue this, you would select additional Title I eligibility if that was needed. That would be for the one-year transition. If an LEA had a campus that was no longer eligible, the campus could remain eligible for one additional year, and this would be to transition out so that the following year, if it did not regain its Title I eligibility, it would be not served. So there's only that one additional year that the LEA can use the one-year transition. If the LEA is grouping its campuses by grade span, because the the low income percentage for the grade span would be beneficial to the LEA. It could serve another campus perhaps. That would be what you would indicate there. If the LEA had an individual EdFlex programmatic waiver for a campus eligibility, it would indicate that. I should point out that checking this box for individual programmatic waiver is not applying for that waiver. The individual programmatic waiver for an EdFlex campus eligibility waiver, that is a separate application process that has to be submitted, has to be reviewed by the state's EdFlex committee, and the LEA would have to be approved by the Commissioner of Education for that waiver. Right now, we do not have any LEAs in the state who have one of these waivers. So if you need one, or you think that you are going to go through that process, feel free to email me and we can talk about it, and I can give you information on what exactly you would need to do to request one of those waivers. Next would be indicating the school-wide status. So if the LEA has the campus that's above 40%, they could choose to be, or 40% or above, they could choose to be a school-wide program. If they are eligible for Title I, but not eligible for a school-wide waiver, or not eligible for a school-wide program, they could select targeted assistance campus. If the LEA is skipping the campus, that means that they are serving lower ranked campuses. They have the option of determining that they were going to put skipped, although there are assurances that the LEA would need to make if they're going to skip a campus, or if the campus is not going to be served at all, they could put not served. If the LEA selects school-wide eligibility, if this had been below 40% and they needed to have an additional school-wide eligibility indicated, they could have been school-wide from the previous year if they had a qualifying percentage last year or in a prior year, or if they had the school-wide EdFlex waiver, they could indicate that here as well. The school-wide eligibility or school-wide EdFlex waiver is a simpler application process. Basically, the LEA completes a supporting documentation form that they retain locally, and they click this button to complete that application process for the school-wide eligibility waiver as part of their consolidated application. So this type of waiver, the school-wide EdFlex waiver, does not need to come to be approved by the EdFlex committee. It's a much simpler process. So we have roughly maybe 80 campuses, in the neighborhood of 80 campuses that have this waiver every year. If this were to be a targeted assistance campus, the LEA would be asked to indicate the number of students who are going to be served at the targeted assistance campus, because it's targeting the assistance to particular students who have been identified as being in the greatest need, or have been identified as being the most at risk of failing to meet the state's academic standards. The LEA would indicate the number of students who had met that particular requirement. Whether a school is targeted assistance or school-wide campus, the amount of their campus allocation is still based on the number of low-income students, not on the number of students who are enrolled, not on the number of students who are served. It's based on the number of low-income students. So the LEA should not think that because they're school-wide, they're getting more money, because it's based on the number of low-income students, not the total enrollment, and not the number who are served. And the consolidated funds would indicate whether funds are being consolidated on a school-wide campus, whether that would be Title I funds only, whether that would be federal funds only, whether it would be federal, state, or local funds. This column is only completed if the campus is indicated that it's a school-wide campus. Otherwise, this column will be grayed out. I mentioned assurances earlier. there is a set of assurances that applies if the LEA has any campuses that are school-wide campuses. There's a set of assurances for targeted assistance campuses. And so if the LEA has any campuses marked as school-wide, they would be required to accept the school-wide campus assurances. If any of their campuses was marked targeted assistance, they would be required to accept the targeted assistance campus assurances. If the LEA has chosen to skip a campus, the LEA must accept the skipped campus assurances. We have 2 new sets of assurances this year that have been added to this list. If the LEA has any school-wide campuses that are school-wide based on the EdFlex waiver, so they had under the additional school-wide eligibility, they had accepted or they had indicated the school-wide EdFlex waiver, they would be required to accept the school-wide EdFlex waiver assurance, which basically is just that the LEA has completed the supporting documentation form for that waiver, and it is on file locally at the LEA. Additionally, if the LEA is choosing to serve any campuses that are below 35%, the 125% special allocation rule kicks in, and the LEA would be required to indicate that they are in compliance with the 125% special allocation rule. Part D deals with supplement non-supplant. For Title I Part A, all LEAs either have a written Title I neutral methodology for distributing its state and local funds to its campuses, or it has a valid statement of exemption. There is a supplement non-supplant handbook that is available to assist LEAs with templates and examples. It also has descriptions of what type of exemptions would qualify and what situations would qualify an LEA for a statement of exemption. But this section basically is to tell us which type of document the LEA has, which is applicable to the LEA.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. My name is Gerardo Ramirez, and I am the Program Director for Title I Part D, as well as the Title II Part A program. So today, we will be covering the PS 3102, which is part of the schedule for the Title I Part A neglected, and the Title I Part D Subpart 2 as well. So in order to fully understand this program schedule, let's talk just a little bit about how is it that it is established. First, we have the law, ESSA law. In there, it houses most of the ESSA titles. And so in there, we are given Title I Part D. Through that, we are also given the program for neglected, the program from delinquent, and at-risk program as well. And so the law provides a definition for each one of those. For the purpose of the PS 3102, we're going to be specifically talking about the neglected and delinquent facilities. Here we have the definitions for each one of them. Essentially, to be considered a facility needs to be a public or private residential facility that is other than a foster home. And then we have the differences of the two. For neglected, it has to be for youth that have been placed there by state law due to abandonment, neglect, or death of parents or guardians. For delinquent facility, these are for youth that are being placed as a result of being adjudicated or to be delinquent or in need of supervision. So adjudication, usually that means that a judge has been involved. And so at that point, that's where you have a delinquent facility. All the programs that run for Title I Part D Subpart 2 most likely will fall on the delinquent facility. Just know that if you have a facility, whether that's neglected or delinquent, it needs to meet the definition as intended in the statute. In order to fully address these definitions, we have just a slightly new look for the PS 3102, which will fall under the participation column that you can see here. And we're going to get into it just a little bit more. So here on the new PS 3102, we have a new category for yes or no participation for Title I Part A. When you have, sorry, there we go. When you are selecting that a facility is neglected, typically that will mean that you have a reservation, part of the Title I Part A program schedule that Vivian covered earlier. In there, you will say if the facility has decided to participate via the LEA LEA reservation or the campus allocation. If the answer is no, that the facility has decided to not participate, that means that the facility has declined the services. When you talk about Title I Part D sub Part 2 on the red box over here, that means that if the facility is a neglected facility, then that section will be disabled because a facility is either a neglected or a delinquent facility. What this means when you have a yes response is that it will trigger a check noted in a PS 3101. That will be for neglected facilities. Remember that Vivian covered earlier that on the Title I Part A, there is a reservation for neglected set aside. And so when you have a neglected facility, there is a requirement for a reservation for such, and that is a check that happens for the PS 3101. If it's a delinquent facility, then it would also trigger a check. But remember that for delinquent facilities, the reservation under 1A will probably be optional, meaning it depends on the services that you're trying to provide for the youth in such facility. What this means though, for the program schedule is that you will have a pop-up box explaining what happens when Title I Part A funding for a facility means no. That basically what it means, if the facility is neglected and the facility has declined services, the LEA's Title I Part A neglected share may be reduced by the amount generated by that facility. Likewise, if the facility has been closed, the neglected share may be reduced by the amount generated by that facility. In either case, the neglected share amount may be then retained by the state for potential transfer to other LEAs serving those facilities for neglected, where the students may have been transferred. This is the implication pop-up box that you will see coming up and when you select no. As you can see, it's quite a lengthy. You will also find this in instructions, but essentially it tells a story of what happens when a facility declines services. And now I have my colleague, Nelly, that will talk through this slide.
Thank you, Gerardo. So based on the information that Gerardo just shared with you, and keeping in mind that if a facility was reported using the SC 9000, that some of the information will pre-populate. But the first thing you'd want to indicate if it of information that is not pre-populated is the facility status. And that would need to be indicated if the facility is closed. And then it asks if it's closed, were services provided in the current school year? If an agreement with the facility has changed and the facility isn't in use anymore, you're going to mark it closed. And then the next thing you'll need to indicate is the facility type, whether it's a neglected or delinquent facility. Next slide. Thank you. The next section, the participation section, you're being asked whether the facility is being served with Title I Part A and or Title I Part D Subpart 2. Under the participation columns, you'll want to indicate yes or no for Title I Part A. And if the response is yes, and you choose LEA reservation, as opposed to campus, it will trigger the validation that was mentioned earlier, requiring an amount on the PS31 on either line 3 for neglected facilities or on line 7 for delinquent facilities. Or your other option is, of course, to choose campus allocation. Now, if the participation response for Title I Part A is no, it means that the facility has declined services under Title I Part A. For a delinquent facility, you select yes for Title I Part D, Subpart 2. But if you're reporting on a neglected facility, the Title I Part D, Subpart 2 boxes will be disabled, as Gerardo mentioned earlier. Also, for delinquent facilities, the written agreement column should have a current date that is before the submission date, and the written agreement assurance box should be checked. Next slide. So in this example, the LEA shows Love ESSA pre-populated based on their SC 9000. The facility is a neglected facility, and it'll be served with Title I Part A by using an LEA reservation. So that's going to trigger the validation for a reservation on the PS 3101. And Title I Part D Subpart 2 becomes disabled, as I mentioned in the last slide. Next slide. And so this example shows ESSA Rocks pre-populated based on their SC 9000. ESSA Rocks is a delinquent facility indicated under the type of facility column. And the LEA is declining Title I Part A, shown under the participation column, and they indicated yes for Title I Part D Subpart 2. So they entered the date they verified the October count. The written agreement date, which again should be a date before the application is submitted, and the written agreement assurance is indicated to complete Part 1 of the schedule. Remember that the October count and signed written agreement dates must be prior to the application submission date, even if you're amending this schedule later. Next slide. And then finally, this last example that I want to share with you is if you want to add a new facility that was not pre-populated. The new facility here in this example is named Love the Children. The facility status is new and it's a neglected facility. The new facility will be served with Title I Part A, so the Title I Part D Subpart 2 questions are disabled. And then for Title I Part A, the LEA has indicated that it will participate through an LEA reservation, which will trigger the validation to enter a reservation on the PS 3101 on line 3 because this is a neglected facility. And then you're just going to click the Add New Facility button to save the line and then complete the rest of the schedule.
Thank you, Nellie. Now we will begin talking about PS 3103, Title I Part C, Migrant Education Program. First thing I'd like to talk about is what PS 3103 schedule is. First of all, this is a schedule that's required if Title I Part C funds are budgeted under the schedule BS 6001 that was mentioned earlier, the program budget summary. If on the application designation certification form, the ADC form that was mentioned earlier for the ESSA grant, you applied as a fiscal agent or you applied on own, the Title I Part C funds for this this schedule must be completed. So let's talk about what that looks like on the ADC form. So in Part 1, you're going to select the appropriate designation. If you're applying on own, that means you're an independent project district. Can apply as a fiscal agent of an SSA or not apply at all. If you don't apply at all, that means you are a non-project district. Or you can apply as a member of an SSA. For part 1, consultation, this has to do with the Parent Advisory Council consultation that must happen. It is a required activity. So on this section, the date entered should be between the first working day in January of the calendar year, the grant open, and the application due date for that year. So that has to be included on there. Part 2 includes all the program required activities that are mentioned. It is not all activities, but it is the key requirement activities. And for this, the applicant should check each box to indicate the organization's acknowledgement and compliance with carrying out these required activities. Now, since these activities are required of all MEP, all boxes should be checked before saving, because if all boxes are not checked, you will get an error message. So what is included in this list of activities in part 2? So first of all, if we look at line 1, IDNR, that's identification recruitment. That is key to the program in identifying and recruiting the eligible migratory children. So this is talking about all the activities that are outlined in the IDNR plan that's included in the Texas Manual for Identification and Recruitment of Migratory Children, and ensuring that there's a quality control in place as well for identification recruitment. Line 2 is a TXNGS part, where we talk about the requirement of encoding all activities into the TXNGS, which is our state database. So beginning July 1st through June 30th, and encode all required data into the TX generation system and conduct all the required activities outlined in the manual for TXNGS and M6. Line 3 is the comprehensive needs assessment. To conduct a comprehensive needs assessment is a very important piece of the program to ensure that we're identifying what the needs for the migratory children is. So we're looking for identifying the unique educational and education-related needs of the migratory children through this local needs assessment. Line 4 is the service delivery plan, and it talks about implementing the required activities for our state Texas service delivery plan, implementing all the required strategies that are outlined in that plan. Line 5 has to do with interstate coordination. That is utilizing the Migrant Student Information Exchange, which is a national database, to promote interstate coordination and timely records exchange. It also includes coordinating with the Texas Migrant Interstate Program, TMIP, during the summer months in order to serve the students from Texas who may be attending out-of-state migrant programs. Finally, line 6 is the program evaluation. It's important in order to ensure that we keep moving the program forward, and as needed, that we do an evaluation of the activities that are conducted throughout the year. So that end of year is to be conducted. So you're going to check off all of these boxes as part of these required activities. Now, what does it mean to check these boxes off? It means the LEA is responsible for incorporating all migrant education program activities, service, plans, guidelines into a migrant-specific section of the district improvement plan and updating it yearly. The activities listed in this section are required of all Title I Part C programs in Texas, so you must maintain documentation of these activities for auditing and monitoring purposes. Please note that additional program requirements are provided in the program-specific provisions and assurances as well. Now we're going to talk about Part 3, Priority for Service Action Plan. So who are the priority for service migratory students? These are the students that are defined as migratory children who made a qualifying move within the previous 1-year period and who are failing or at most risk of failing to meet the state's academic standards or who have dropped out of school. These are the children that are going to have priority for the migratory services. So in this section, you are to check the box to indicate your organization's acknowledgement of compliance with carrying out each of these required activities. If the box is not checked, an error message appears stating that the item in the priority for service plan must be checked. So in providing services with Title I Part C funds, LEAs shall give priority to serving the PFS migratory children with MEP funds before using the migrant funds to address the needs of other migratory children. And keep in mind, not only must services be offered to PFS students first, but the LEAs and the education service centers must follow up with these students to ensure that they are indeed receiving the services. And the services being provided must meet the actual needs of each of the PFS students and not just provided because they're PFS, but ensuring that there's an actual need. So what are the activities for PFS? Line 1 talks about develop a PFS action plan. It must explain the criteria for defining the priority for service students. It should include timelines and objectives. Line 2, include the priority for service action plan in the district improvement plan. That means as a separate section appropriately labeled or identified as migrant PFS action plan, rather than integrating that plan or those elements into the other PFS sections. Line 3 talks about running a PFS report from TXNGS on a monthly basis. We want to make sure we're always looking at who are the children that qualify for PFS. So it must be done on a monthly basis in order to identify the PFS children and youth who are to be given priority for the MEP services. Now we move into part 4. These are the planned supplemental activities. These are above and beyond. These are the activities that we're going to plan for the different grade spans. So you're going to check the box to indicate the planned activity type at each of the grade bands or spans. So you've got supplemental instruction, you've got summer program activities, support services. But if no activities are planned due to justifiable circumstances, then you can mark an A and provide an explanation in the box that is provided there. If no box for any of the grade spans are checked, then an error message will appear. So just keep in mind, you must check something for each one of the grade spans. When marking the planned supplemental activities in part 4, consider the fidelity of the activities as intended in the state service delivery plan that I talked about earlier. There is a link to the SDP when you look at the provisions and assurances or the program guidelines if you want to be able to see what those activities are, what that plan looks like. Again, keep in mind, these activities can be supplemental instructional services or supplemental support services. So you have there the different pieces that you can incorporate. Again, supplemental, instruction, summer programs, and support services. So for each of the the supplemental activities that you can provide. I provided just a few of the recommended activities, but this is not all inclusive. These are just some possible activities that can be provided for each of the grade spans. For example, for early education through kindergarten, that can include home-based programs for 3 and 4-year-olds, or supplemental support by a teacher for migratory kindergarten or kindergarten students that are maybe performing below the expected level of development. For grades 1st through 5th, you can have supplemental instructional services such as tutorials. For example, extended day tutorials, tutorials in the core content areas, extended tutorials to prepare them for a statewide assessment. Reading instruction by a teacher, math instruction by a teacher. When you're looking at 6th through 12th grade services, you're looking at supplemental instructional services that can include educational support, such as training, support for migratory students on how to effectively use reading or math resources and tools. You can maybe have extended day statewide assessment tutorials. You can have reading instruction by a teacher, math instruction by a teacher, or even credit accrual, such as distance learning coursework. Those are just some examples. For summer programs, we have Project SMART, which is an initiative of TEA, which is a program that is done in order to ensure that the migratory students have access to math instruction in the summer. So it is to be utilized when providing summer supplemental services in mathematics to migratory children. Then we have supplemental support services. For example, this can include providing clothing, providing access to health, nutrition, social services, or providing migratory families with the necessary educational supplies. Now, if your organization decides they want to provide additional information, we have an additional information box in there for anything that your LEA may want to include in here. So thank you so much. This is the Title I Part C section. And I'll hand it over to the next presenter, Gerardo. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, hello, everybody. Nice to see you again. As I mentioned before, I also help with the Title II Part A program. So let's talk about the PS 3104. So this schedule is a very simple schedule. It's divided into 2 parts. And so essentially what you'll see at the very top is the checkbox if the LEA has either redirected 100% of Title II Part A funds using REAP or fund and transferability that earlier Didi Garcia covered. If that is the case, then you check that box and the whole schedule will be disabled as that it's always needed to be answered. However, if that is not the case, then you move on to the next sections of the schedule. On part 1, section A, essentially this is just all information only. There is no changes to this. We'll adjust the total allocation. But in here, you see the information from REAP from Title IV Part A and REAP out of Title II Part A. This is connected to the dependencies that were covered earlier in the presentation. Part 1, section B is also read only. In here, you will see on line 1, current year allocation of funds. For line 2 is transfer in from Title IV Part A via fund and transferability. Line 3 is transfer out for Title II Part A via fund and transferability. And then you will have the total allocation and transfer amounts. Then we get to section C, which is sort of like the medium of the schedule. Here we have the 3 different areas of focus that applies for Title II Part A, which are recruit, support, and retain effective teachers and principals, professional development, educator growth, and evidence-based activities. When you apply for this funding via the provisions and, when you certify and you review the provisions and assurances, in there, we talk about all the requirements that Title II Part A program has. For the Title II Part A program, most of the activities, if not all, have to be falling within either one of those three categories. Keep in mind though, that as you are applying for this funding and let's say you select professional development, documentation must be kept on file locally and available upon request by TA and or an auditor. So it is the responsibility of the LEA to show documentation of such activities that were paid out of Title II Part A funds, in particular the areas of focus that you are trying to coordinate. For line 4, when you have other allowable activities, these are reserve activities that you may think may not fall within the 3 areas of focus. Please keep in mind that we are trying to really make the case that whatever activity you think may fall on number 4, which is an other, please try to either make it into one of the first 3 areas of focus, as typically they end up being part of one of them. And then when you have part 2, that's for additional information, which is optional. This is any information that you may think we might need to know as you fill out the schedule, that it will be helpful to for us whenever we see this schedule coming in. And then we move on a little bit more with Nelly.
Thanks, Gerardo. Okay, so within the post-award compliance unit, our review of the PS 3104 in our reviews, we ran across a few items that I wanted to go over really quickly with you. As Gerardo noted, at least one activity must be indicated in Part C of the PS 3104 for planned uses of funds. Be aware that if PMPs are being served with Title II Part A on the PS 3099 Line 2 Professional Development Educator Growth is the only allowable use of funds for those PMPs. And so if you are serving PMPs, you want to be sure to check the professional, with Title II Part A, you want to be sure to check the Professional Development Educator Growth box number 2. For line 4, we review for allowability, and this past review period, we found that many of the items placed on line 4 actually fell under the items listed on lines 1 through 3. Some examples, we saw class size reduction. Excuse me, class size reduction indicated on line 4 several times. But according to the Title II Part A non-regulatory guidance, it specifically states that class size reduction is an evidence-based activity and therefore should be accounted for on line 3, evidence-based activities. We asked another LEA to amend to make changes to line 4 because they had entered materials and other means to recruit teachers as one statement and professional development as another statement. Both of those activities fall under lines 1 and 2 respectively. And so we asked them to amend to remove the narrative in the line 4 box and just to indicate those items on lines 1 and 2. And then finally, we asked an LEA to amend based on an entry on line 4 that simply read mini conference. We required additional clarification, so we asked whether they were hosting the conference, which is unallowable for Title II Part A, or if staff are attending a mini conference, which would fall under line 2 professional development. So the application needed to be corrected to remove the designation if hosting the conference was the intent, or to remove it and check line 2 instead if the employees were actually attending the mini conference. Thank you.
All right, good morning. We are going to go into Title III now, the PS 3106. All right, so the first section we're going to talk about here is for the ELA Part 1. Now, one of the things I do want to bring to your attention is that Title III statute is unique in a couple different ways. One of them is that for an LEA to apply as independent with the funding, an LEA must generate over $10,000. So if you are an LEA who does not generate that amount to cross that threshold, then you do have the ability, the option to then join a shared service arrangement, which your ESCs all serve as fiscal agents. And so so it's possible that some of you all may not have seen this before, and it could be because you have not yet met that threshold of 10,000. But if you are applying as an independent, the first section here is focusing on the supplemental activities, and we're looking at expenditures that are going above and beyond what is like state mandates for the bilingual education or ESL programs. And here we're thinking about those expenditures to go above and beyond. And for Section A, there has to at least be one activity selected with your funds. Now, I do like to also explain the difference between the selection 1 and then 2. So if you are an LEA who is in the process of transitioning your program model, for example, content-based to a bilingual program model, then Title III funds can be used to support that transition period. Sometimes that is, helping teachers get trained. Sometimes it is equipping classrooms. Whatever that is, A would be that selection for you. That is supporting the development and implementation of that language instructional educational program. Now, if you are an LEA who is not planning on transitioning or changing your program models that you currently offer, then selection 2 would be the appropriate one for you. This is enhancing the existing program model. Now, it is also possible that you as an LEA may select 1 and 2. Maybe you do have some program models that are going to stay in existence, but maybe you are transitioning, say, your elementary grade levels, changing it to a bilingual program. But just know that there is a difference between 1 and 2. 1 being that you are transitioning to a new model, or 2, you're not making a change, but you're just wanting to enhance what you currently offer. Now, some of these are also activities that you may find also are allowable with your BEA funds, that 55 Direct PIC 25 funding code. So just know that we're always looking that these are going to be supplemental above and beyond. Now, going into Part B. Part B is, once again, still supplemental activities, but this is focused on our parent, family, and community engagement requirements under Title III. Now, Title III requires that you conduct all 3 of those engagement components. So for this section, all boxes must be checked. This is just a way as an assurance to know that you as an independent LEA drawing Title III funds, that the parent outreach and training, the family literacy services and or family outreach and trainings, or the community participation programs are all required. Okay, so if you need support and understanding a little bit more as far as those differences, you can definitely reach out to your ESCs, your program staff there, or you can reach out to us at the agency. But just know that for Part B, all 3 boxes must be selected. Now for Part C, the supplemental activities around professional development. Now, this following professional development activity should be supplemental to any professional development trainings that fulfill state mandated programs and activities. Now, there may be some trainings that are already in place that are state mandated. There are some areas, some acronyms that usually provide guidance around that we usually know those are usually state mandated. For example, we talk about LPAC, we talk about TELPAS, we talk about ELPS. So if there are trainings built around those acronyms, most likely those are going to be state mandated, or those are going to be state focused. So those would not be professional development areas that we would use our Title III funds on. Now you can see here there are 5 already pre-populated lines with professional development areas. And so, for example, the instructional strategies for English learners. And you will also see that we use the term English learner in these schedules, because this is the term that we use federally. But we do know that we then use emergent bilingual when we talk about state. So here is when we're thinking about instructional strategies. So these are best practices in the classrooms. This would also be for any teacher who would be providing instructional practices and instruction to our emergent bilingual students, not just our core content areas, but any teacher instructing them. Understanding and implementation of assessments of English learners. Understanding the implementation of ELAP standards, academic content standards for English learners. Subject matter knowledge for teachers, or the alignment of curriculum in language instruction educational programs for ELP standards. So many times we think about progress monitoring. We think about what those results that come in from our state assessments, but then it's also understanding, what do we do with that? What does that look like? So we think about that professional development of progress monitoring. Now, if there's an area of professional development that you all have been able to identify in a needs assessment, and that can be from your CIP, your DIP, or another needs assessment, and if there is an area that is not indicated here, then you do have option 6. You can indicate, you can narrate and document a different professional development area. So that is allowable for you to select there. You can select more than one box in C, but just know that indicating in the application what your intent is what your goal would be for the upcoming school year. Now, let's go into the other schedule that is focused on Title III funding. Now, some of you all may be generating the additional Title III immigrant funding. These are for LEAs who show a significant increase of students who have been identified and met the definition as an immigrant student. And so you will generate additional Title III funds on top of your ELA. So this has a different separate schedule. So let's go into the schedule here. So once again, some of you all may not see this schedule as an option when you are filling out your application. If you don't see this, then that means that you are an LEA that did not qualify or was eligible for this school year. Now, there is not a threshold to be independent with this funding. As you heard, the ELA, you had that $10,000 threshold. For the Title III immigrant funding, there is not a threshold. So if you generate $3,000, then you are eligible to apply independently for the funds. Now, for this section here, when we look at A, still supplemental activities focused around the language instruction educational program. Now, these funds are to pay for supplemental activities that provide enhanced instructional opportunities for immigrant children and youth. Now, you will see that there are 7 options here. Okay, so there's not an other. So the supplemental activities that you are considering would need to fall into these 7 options. Now, you will also see that some of these options were also allowances with your ELA funds. So if you have many students who are dual identified as emergent bilingual and as an immigrant student, then you're going to want to then think as far as like, what is your best use of funding, your ELA or your immigrant funding, especially since you have the access to both funding sources. Now, the idea is that our immigrant funding is still supplemental to your other federal sources, which would also be your ELA. We think of these as those cherries on top. What are those additional expenditures and supplemental activities? Now, here you can see there should be at least one activity selected in this section. Okay, because you are generating the funds, the expectation is that you are expending these funds. And these are ones that are allowable in statute. Now, Part B is also focusing on supplemental activities around parent, family, and community outreach, very similar to your ELA. You can see are the same options, 1, 2, and 3, and then there is a fourth option, NA. It is allowable for you to select NA in this section because it is also possible that you are already expending your ELA funds to meet those parent, family, community needs. And so you may not need to expend any of your funds in this funding source towards those same needs identified. Now, C, supplemental activities around support for personnel. Now, this is different than your ELA. ELA focused on professional development. This one is a little bit different, still has professional development, but this one also gives you the opportunity for recruitment. So if you look here, the following activities should be supplemental and supporting personnel who have been specifically trained or are being trained to provide services to immigrant children and youth. Now, there are two targeted staffing here. We see teachers and we see paraprofessionals. Now, I will say that paraprofessionals is, does get surfaced under this funding source here. And so you can see that there are 3 columns where we can do recruitment, training, and NA. Now, we would go across each of these rows. For example, for teachers, do we need to expend any funds based off of a needs assessment to recruit teachers who are already trained around supporting immigrant students? Or do we need to put money into providing training to those who we already have employed? Or maybe you select NA, as in maybe you already have staff who are trained, or you have already hired staff who are already experts in supporting immigrants, students. Now, paraprofessionals on row 2, you would also answer across either recruitment, training, or NA. Now, there would need to be at least one of those boxes selected for each row. Okay, it is possible that you can select recruitment and training, or if you choose not to do either one of those, then you still need to select NA in order for you to move forward with this schedule.
Welcome back. This is Lenitra Guess, and I am the PNP Ombudsman, as well as the Title IV Program Director. And so I'm going to get started today talking about the PS 3107, which is the Title IV Part A Student Support and Academic Enrichment Grant. The Title IV Part A grant is specifically used for safe and healthy students, well-rounded education, as well as the effective uses of technology. And so on the schedule in Part 1, if there were 100% of the Title IV funds redirected, by using REAP or funding transferability, those amounts will automatically be pulled from that schedule and posted here on 1A. Okay. I'll try and talk a little louder. If the LEA has elected to use REAP flexibility from 2A or to redirect Title IV Part A, the funds are pre-populated in Part 1A. in the LEA will enter student enrollment ages 5 through 17 located within the district. I wanted to share 2 new verifications that are behind the scenes for the Title IV program. If an LEA is applying for both Title II Part A and Title IV Part A, and not Title I Part A, the parts C1 and F1, which is the low income amounts for those 2 programs, should equal. If the LEA is applying for Title I Part A, amounts in Title IIA and Title IV, it must equal the Title I Part A enrollment. Here you can see the planned use of funds at the beginning of the school year. The LEA will indicate how much funding it plans to budget for each of these items. The administration for Title IV that goes on the schedule is actually the direct administration. There is a 2% maximum for Title IV grants in the area of administration. If a district receives at least $30,000 or more in Title IV Part A, it must use at least 20% of the funding in well-rounded educational opportunities and safe and healthy students. It would also need to put an amount in the activities to support effective use of technology. Regardless of how much funding an LEA receives, it is still limited to a maximum of 15% in the area of technology, the use of technology. And the use of technology does include any devices, equipment, or software applications that are approved, that are purchased. If a district does not have an allocation greater than at 30,000 or greater, it only needs to select at least one content area, which from well-rounded education, safe and support and healthy students, and activities to support effective use of technology. The amount budgeted column, it provides the budget limits, as you can see, and then it will give you the percentage of budget. For Part 2A, under Part 2A, the program requirement assurances, the LEA must check box 2A1 or box A2. For box A1, it is required if the LEA has equal or greater than 30,000 allocation in Title IV, it must conduct a comprehensive needs assessment. In addition to that needs assessment, it must ensure that it is including all required stakeholders. If the district receives less than $30,000, it still must consult with stakeholders to determine how to prioritize the use of Title IV funds. And the comprehensive needs assessment, however, is not required if the LEA receives the less than 30,000. However, it is highly recommended as a best practice that all LEAs would conduct a comprehensive needs assessment annually to know how the Title IV funds are best used. LEAs must keep documentation on file and readily available for TA and or auditors for the required comprehensive needs assessment for those districts that receive at least $30,000 or more. One of the things that an LEA must remember is that it is a requirement that it set aside funds to prioritize the distribution of Title IV. And so before it can use those funds on anything else, the LEAs must ensure that the activities identified are reasonable and necessary. It must carry out the intent and purposes of the program for Title IV. It must be considered a priority to address schools with the greatest needs, be considered a priority to address schools with the greatest needs with children counted for purposes under Title I, Part A, low performing schools, underperforming student subgroups, and unsafe schools. In addition, the Title IV funds must be measurable and have a positive impact on student achievement. A lot of times I do receive questions on allowable costs for different items. The most important thing is looking at the prioritized distribution requirements. If it's not reasonable and necessary, something that's measurable and that has a positive impact on student achievement and supplemental to any state and local mandates, it is not a use for Title IV funds. So on the PS 3107, if you have met all of those requirements, then you would check B1, assuring that the distribution of funds has been prioritized. The next section is Part C, 2C, supplement, not supplant. Title IV program funds must supplement, that means over and beyond anything that is state required. The LEA assures that funds would not be used for any of the state mandates, state regulations, or state rules. Anything that the state requires is not an allowable expense. So you need to familiarize yourself with, number one, what are the state requirements of Title IV Part A? And also, what are the uses of Title IV Part A? Just because there is an allowable use and a guidance or in the statute does not mean in Texas it's allowable if it is a state requirement. Part D in the application schedule. First, if there are any funds being spent on well-rounded education, safe and healthy students, and the effective use of technology, the LEA must check the boxes. For an LEA that has at least $30,000 or more, they would be required to check all three boxes and have documentation to support it. If an LEA is under that amount and is only using funds, for example, for well-rounded education, it would only need to check one box. It could check D1 because all of the funding is being used in some way for well-rounded educational opportunities. At the end of the schedule, there is a Part 3. If there is any additional information or comments that the LEA would like to state, this is where the LEA would put that additional information. Thank you. And now I will turn it over to Vivian, Title I.
Okay, so I'd like to talk now about the WV 4001. That is the Title I Part A carryover waiver schedule. This schedule is a little bit different from any of the others in the application in that it is not part of the original application submission. This is a schedule that is completed usually in the spring, in the February, March kind of time frame, after the carryover amounts have been calculated. So there is a requirement in the Title I Part A statute that no more than 15% of the funds allocated to an LEA is available to carry over. There is a statutory waiver that's available once every 3 years, where the LEA may choose to carry over more than 15%. So that carryover waiver that's available under statute, the LEA can use once every 3 years if the request for the carryover funds is deemed reasonable and necessary, or if the supplemental appropriations for Title I Part A have become available, and so the LEA has more funding than they originally were led to believe. There is an exclusion for the carryover limitation. If the LEA receives less than $50,000 for its Title I Part A entitlement, then there is no percentage limitation for the carryover. So what happens when the LEA is carrying over more than 15%? When the final entitlements are calculated, we'll know what the 15% actually is. And so if the LEA is trying to carry over more than 15% of that final amount, the agency will determine if the LEA is eligible for the statutory waiver. They will send out a survey to the LEA. TEA staff will send out a survey to the LEA and will ask the following questions on the survey. So they want to know if the LEA is wishing to implement or is wishing to request a carryover waiver so that they can have the full amount of those funds available. They will be asked to identify at least one justification for the reason for the LEA's carryover amount exceeding the 15%. And they're asked to identify at least one option for how the LEA plans to reduce the final carryover amount to 15% or less during the final year of or during the final part of the funding period. Once that survey's been completed, and that survey will be sent to the superintendent as listed on the Ask TED directory, so LEA needs to be really sure that they keep up with the current superintendent needs to be listed on Ask TED. Once that survey's has been completed, the LEA will receive an email from TEA confirming that we received the survey and that it was complete. And at that point, the LEA will be instructed to start an amendment, and they'll complete the GS 2900, which is the purpose of the amendment schedule. And they will need to keep that amendment in draft status while TEA actually completes the WV 4000 schedule. So not only is it not part of the original application, it's actually a schedule that has to be initiated by TEA staff. Then the LEA will get another email letting them know that they can go ahead and budget their funds and submit the amendment. So what happens if the LEA is not eligible for that statutory waiver? So if, for example, they used it last year. So if they used it last year, they don't have the statutory waiver available to them this year because they can only use it once every 3 years. So if that's the case, TEA will determine whether the LEA received an increase in its Title I Part A entitlement between the time they received their planning amount to the final entitlement amount when it was calculated. And if there was an increase in that amount, then the LEA is eligible to receive the carryover waiver under the EdFlex program. And grant staff will then initiate the waiver schedule in the application to indicate that it is an EdFlex waiver as opposed to a statutory waiver.